Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on Snoozecast.com and follow us on Instagram at Snoozecast to find behind-the-scenes content. If you'd like to get an email once a week with upcoming sleep stories and other news, subscribe to the Snoozeletter at Snoozecast.com. This episode is brought to you by Telegraphic Currents. Tonight, we'll read another excerpt from The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, published in 1908. This story centers around 4 small animals: mole, rat, toad, and badger. Their stories take place in the countryside of Edwardian England. If you'd like to start with the first episode, it aired on March 22nd, 2021. To follow along easily in order, go to snoozecast.com/series. In the last episode, the 2 little friends, Water Rat and Mole, spend more time in Mr. Badger's cozy underground dwelling with Mr. Otter before returning safely home. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. The 2 friends, Mole and Rat, were returning across country after a long day's outing with Otter, exploring on the wide uplands where certain streams tributary to their own river had their first small beginnings, and the shades of the short winter day were closing in on them, and they had still some distance to go. They found a beaten track that made walking a lighter business and responded, moreover, to that small, questioning something which all animals carry inside them, saying unmistakably, "Yes, quite right. This leads home." The rapid nightfall of mid-December had quite beset the little village as they journeyed through on soft feet over a first thin fall of powdery snow. Once beyond the village, where the cottages ceased abruptly, on either side of the road they could smell through the darkness the friendly fields again, and they braced themselves for the last long stretch, the home stretch, the stretch that we know is bound to end sometime in the rattle of the door latch, the sudden firelight, and the sight of familiar things greeting us as long absent travelers from far oversea. They plodded along steadily and silently, each of them thinking his own thoughts. The moles ran a good deal on supper, as it was pitch dark, and it was all a strange country for him as far as he knew, and he was obediently following in the wake of the rat, leaving the guidance entirely to him. As for the rat, he was walking a little way ahead, as his habit was, his shoulders humped, his eyes fixed on the straight gray road in front of him, so he did not notice poor Mole when suddenly the summons reached him. We others, who have long lost the more subtle of the physical senses, have not even proper terms to express an animal's intercommunications with his surroundings, living or otherwise, and have only the word smell, for instance, to include the whole range of delicate thrills which murmur in the nose of the animal day and night, summoning, warning, inciting, repelling. It was one of these mysterious fairy calls from out of the void that suddenly reached Mole in the darkness, making him tingle through and through with its very familiar appeal. Even while yet he could not clearly remember what it was. He stopped, dead in his tracks, his nose searching hither and thither in its efforts to recapture the fine filament, the telegraphic current that had so strongly moved him. A moment, and he had caught it again. And with it this time came recollection in fullest flood. Home. That was what they meant. Those caressing appeals, those soft touches wafted through the air, those invisible little hands pulling and tugging all one way. Why, it must be quite close by him at that moment. His old home that he had hurriedly forsaken and never sought again that day when he first found the river. And now it was sending out its scouts and its messengers to capture him and bring him in. Since his escape on that bright morning, he had hardly given it a thought. So absorbed had he been in his new life, in all its pleasures, its surprises, its fresh and captivating experiences. Now, with a rush of old memories, how clearly it stood up before him in the darkness. Shabby indeed, and small and poorly furnished, and yet his, the home he had made for himself, the home he had been so happy to get back to after his day's work. And the home had been happy with him, too, evidently, and was missing him, and wanted him back, and was telling him so, through his nose, sorrowfully, reproachfully, but with no bitterness or anger, only with plaintive reminder that it was there and wanted him. The call was clear. The summons was plain. He must obey it instantly and go. "Ratty," he called, full of joyful excitement. "Hold on. Come back. I want you quick." "Oh, come along, Mole, do," replied the rat cheerfully, still plodding along. "Please stop, Ratty," pleaded the poor mole, in anguish of heart. "You don't understand. It's my home, my old home. I've just come across the smell of it, and it's close by here. It's really quite close. and I must go to it. I must. Oh, come back, Ratty. Please come back. The rat was by this time very far ahead, too far to hear clearly what the mole was calling, too far to catch the sharp note of painful appeal in his voice. And he was much taken up with the weather, for he too could smell something suspiciously like approaching snow. Mole, we mustn't stop now, really, he called back. We'll come back for it tomorrow, whatever it is you found. But I daren't stop now. It's late, and the snow's coming on again, and I'm not sure of the way. And I want your nose, Mole, so come on quick, there's a good fellow. And the rat pressed forward on his way without waiting for an answer. Poor Mole stood alone on the road, his heart torn asunder, and a big sob gathering somewhere low down inside him, to leap up to the surface presently, he knew, in passionate escape. But even under such a test as this, his loyalty to his friend stood firm. Never for a moment did he dream of abandoning him. Meanwhile, the wafts from his old home pleaded, whispered, conjured, and finally claimed him imperiously. He dared not tarry longer within their magic circle. With a wrench that tore his very heartstrings, he set his face down the road and followed submissively in the track of the rat, while faint, thin little smells, still dogging his retreating nose, reproached him for his new friendship and his callous forgetfulness. With an effort, he caught up to the unsuspecting rat, who began chattering cheerfully about what they would do when they got back, and how jolly a fire of logs in the parlor would be, and what a supper he meant to eat, never noticing his companion's silence and distressful state of mind. At last, however, when they had gone some considerable way further, and were passing some tree stumps at the edge of a copse that bordered the road, he stopped and said kindly, Look here, Mole, old chap. You seem dead tired. No talk left in you, and your feet dragging like lead. We'll sit down here for a minute and rest. The snow has held off so far, and the best part of our journey is over. The mole subsided forlornly on a tree stump and tried to control himself, for he felt it surely coming. Up and up, the sob forced its way to the air, and then another, and another, and others thick and fast, till poor Mole at last gave up the struggle and cried freely and helplessly and openly, now that he knew it was all over, and he had lost what he could hardly be said to have found. The rat, astonished and dismayed at the mole's grief, did not dare to speak for a while. At last he said, very quietly and sympathetically, What is it, old fellow? Whatever can be the matter? Tell us your trouble. Let me see what I can do." Poor Mole found it difficult to get any words out between the upheavals of his chest that followed one upon another so quickly, and held back speech and choked it as it came. "I know it's a shabby, dingy little place," he sobbed forth at last, brokenly. "Not like your cozy quarters, or Toad's beautiful hall, or Badger's great house. But it was my own little home, and I was fond of it. And I went away and forgot all about it. And then I smelt it suddenly on the road when I called and you wouldn't listen, Rat. And everything came back to me with a rush. And I wanted it. Oh, dear. And when you wouldn't turn back, Ratty, and I had to leave it, though I was smelling it all the time, I thought my heart would break. We might have just gone and had one look at it, Ratty. Only one look. It was close by. But you wouldn't turn back, Ratty. Oh, dear." Recollection brought fresh waves of sorrow, and sobs again took full charge of him, preventing further speech. The rat stared straight in front of him, saying nothing, only patting Mole gently on the shoulder. After a time, he muttered gloomily, "I see it all now. What a pig I've been. A pig, that's me. Just a plain pig." He waited till Mole's sobs became gradually less stormy and more rhythmical. He waited till at last sniffs were frequent and sobs only intermittent. Then he rose from his seat and, remarking carelessly, "Well, now we'd really better be getting on, old chap," he set off up the road again, over the toilsome way they had come. "Wherever are you going, Ratty?" cried the tearful Mole, looking up in alarm. "We're going to find that home of yours, old fellow," replied the rat pleasantly. "So you had better come along, for it'll take some finding, and we shall want your nose." "Oh, come back, Ratty, do," cried the Mole, getting up and hurrying after him. "It's no good, I tell you. It's too late. It's too dark, and the place is too far off. And the snow's coming, and I never meant to let you know I was feeling that way about it. It was all an accident. And think of Riverbank and your supper." "Hang Riverbank and supper too," said the rat heartily. "I tell you, I'm going to find this place now if I stay out all night. So cheer up, old chap, and take my arm, and we'll very soon be back there again." Still snuffling, pleading, and reluctant, Mole suffered himself to be dragged back along the road by his imperious companion, who by a flow of cheerful talk and anecdote endeavored to beguile his spirits back and make the weary way seem shorter. When at last it seemed to the rat that they must be nearing that part of the road where the Mole had been held up, he said, "Now, no more talking. Business. Use your nose and give your mind to it." They moved on in silence for some little way, when suddenly the rat was conscious, through his arms that was linked in Mole's, of a faint sort of electric thrill that was passing down that animal's body. Instantly, he disengaged himself, fell back a pace, and waited, all attention. The signals were coming through. Mole stood a moment, rigid, while his uplifted nose, quivering slightly, felt the air. Then, a short, quick run forward, a fault, a check, a try back, and then a slow, steady, confident advance. The rat, much excited, kept close to his heels as the mole, with something of the air of a sleepwalker, crossed a dry ditch, scrambled through a hedge, and nosed his way over a field open and trackless and bare in the faint starlight. Suddenly, without giving warning, he dived. But the rat was on the alert and promptly followed him down the tunnel to which his unerring nose had faithfully led him. It was close and airless, and the earthy smell was strong, and it seemed a long time to Rat ere the passage ended, and he could stand erect and stretch and shake himself. The mole struck a match, and by its light the rat saw that they were standing in an open space, neatly swept and sanded underfoot, and directly facing them was Mole's little front door, with Mole End painted in Gothic lettering over the bell pull at the side. Mole reached down a lantern from a nail on the wall and lit it, and the rat, looking round him, saw that they were in a sort of forecourt. A garden seat stood on one side of the door, and on the other a roller, for the mole, who was a tidy animal when at home, could not stand having his ground kicked up by other animals into little runs that ended in earth heaps. On the walls hung wire baskets with ferns in them, alternating with brackets carrying plaster statuary, Garibaldi, and the infant Samuel, and Queen Victoria. Down on one side of the forecourt ran a skittle alley, with benches along it, and little wooden tables marked with rings that hinted at beer mugs. In the middle was a small round pond containing goldfish and surrounded by a cockleshell border. Out of the center of the pond rose a fanciful erection clothed in more cockleshells and topped by a large silvered glass ball that reflected everything all wrong and had a very pleasing effect. Mole's face beamed at the sight of all these objects so dear to him, and he hurried Rat through the door, lit a lamp in the hall, and took one glance round his old home. He saw the dust lying thick on everything, saw the cheerless, deserted look of the long neglected house and its narrow, meager dimensions, its worn and shabby contents, and collapsed again on a hall chair, his nose to his paws. "Oh, Ratty," he cried dismally, "why ever did I do it? Why did I bring you to this poor, cold little place on a night like this, when you might have been at Riverbank by this time, toasting your toes before a blazing fire, with all your own nice things about you?" The rat paid no heed to his doleful self-reproaches. He was running here and there, opening doors, inspecting rooms and cupboards, and lighting lamps and candles and sticking them up everywhere. "What a capital little house this is," he called out cheerily. "So compact, so well planned. Everything here and everything in its place. We'll make a jolly night of it. The first thing we want is a good fire. I'll see to that. I always know where to find things. So this is the parlor. Splendid. Your own idea, those little sleeping bunks in the wall? Capital. Now, I'll fetch the wood and the coals, and you get a duster, Mole. You'll find one in the drawer of the kitchen table. And try and smarten things up a bit. Bustle about, old chap." Encouraged by his inspiriting companion, the mole roused himself and dusted and polished with energy and heartiness, while the rat, running to and fro with armfuls of fuel, soon had a cheerful blaze roaring up the chimney. He hailed the mole to come and warm himself. But Mole promptly had another fit of the blues, dropping down on a couch in dark despair and burying his face in his duster. "Rat," he moaned, "how about your supper? Your poor, cold, hungry, weary animal for a supper? I've nothing to give you. Nothing. Not a crumb." "What a fellow you are for giving in," said the rat reproachfully. "Why, only just now I saw a sardine opener on the kitchen dresser, quite distinctly, and everybody knows that means there are sardines about somewhere in this neighborhood. Rouse yourself, pull yourself together, and come with me and forage." They went and foraged accordingly, hunting through every cupboard and turning out every drawer. The result was not very depressing after all, though of course it might have been better. A tin of sardines, a box of Captain's biscuits, nearly full, and a German sausage encased in silver paper. "There's a banquet for you," observed the rat as he arranged the table. "I know some animals who would give their ears to be sitting down to a supper with us tonight." "No bread," groaned the mole. "No butter. No pâté de foie gras, no champagne," continued the rat, grinning. "And that reminds me, what's that little door at the end of the passage? Your cellar, of course. every luxury in this house. Just you wait a minute. He made for the cellar door and presently reappeared, somewhat dusty, with a bottle of beer in each paw and another under each arm. Self-indulgent beggar you seem to be, Mole, he observed. Deny yourself nothing. This is really the jolliest little place I ever was in. Now, wherever did you pick up those prints? Makes the place look so homelike, they do. No wonder you're so fond of it, Mole. Tell us all about it, and how you came to make it what it is. Then, while the rat busied himself fetching plates and knives and forks and mustard, which he mixed in an egg cup, the mole, his bosom still heaving from his recent emotion, related, somewhat shyly at first, but with more freedom as he warmed to his subject, how this was planned and how that was thought out, and how this was got through a windfall from an aunt, and that was found at a wonderful bargain, and this other thing was bought out of laborious savings and a certain amount of going without.